So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm Dr. Lindsay Kirkpatrick from Pediatric Infectious Disease Division at Riley Hospital for Children in Indianapolis, and I'm filling in for Sarah Quinney today as she is at a conference. And so I'd like to introduce our speaker, Victor Nizet. Victor is a physician scientist and a distinguished professor of pediatrics and pharmacy at the University of California, San Diego, where he also serves as the vice chair for basic research in the Department of Pediatrics and chief of the Division of Host-Microbe Systems and Therapeutics. A native of Santa Barbara, California, and graduate of Reed College in Portland, Oregon, he completed medical school at Stanford University, residency and chief residency in pediatrics at Harvard University, Boston Children's Hospital, and pediatric infectious diseases fellowship training at Seattle Children's Hospital. Since joining UCSD in 1997, Nizet has led a large basic and translational research program focused on discovering virulence factors of invasive bacterial pathogens, elucidating mechanisms of host innate immunity, and innovative approaches to infectious disease therapy. Victor has authored over 510 peer-reviewed publications and has collaborated with many academic labs and biotechnology interests in exploring new antibiotics, vaccines, and immune-based therapies against drug-resistant pathogens or sepsis. He has also spearheaded the UC San Diego Collaborative to Halt Antibiotic-Resistant Microbes, also called CHARM, a campus-wide research and educational initiative focused on science-based solutions to the global antibiotic resistance crisis. Professor Nizet is an elected member of the American Society for Clinical Investigation, Association of American Physicians, American Academy of Microbiology, American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the National Academy of Medicine. His contributions were recognized by the Society for Pediatric Research, E. Mead Johnson Award for Excellence in Research in Pediatrics, and the American Society for Microbiology D.C. White Award for Interdisciplinary Research and Mentoring. At University of California, San Diego, he has been the recipient of Chancellor's Associate Award for Excellence in Research in Science and Engineering, the Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Postdoctoral Scholar Mentorship, and the inaugural Health Sciences Award for Excellence in Junior Faculty Mentoring. The title of his presentation today will be Responding to Reviewers. Professor Nizet did mention that he is happy to have interruptions for this talk, so please feel so to do so. Please put your questions in the Q&A or raise your hand and we can facilitate that. Thank you very much. I'm going to shoot it to you, Victor.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay, and great to be here with the MPRINT cohort, and always very proud that UCSD and allowing me to participate as part of the team has been part of the national NICHD pediatric clinical pharmacology community for so many years in all its different iterations. So a topic that I had spoken about rather informally to our own Clinical and Translational Research Institute and junior faculty who are getting KL2 awards was on strategies to respond to reviewers. And this was both reviewers to your grant or reviewers to your manuscript. And Audrey Tremblay, our co-PI for the MPRINT program here in San Diego, suggested that I consolidate this into a talk and share it with the trainees in the network. And so that's exactly what I want to present today. And it's, some of my own perspectives, but also there have been some good resources in the literature, which I'll share and expand upon, but really it's to stimulate a discussion. And I'm going to keep my right eye here on the Q&A for people who might have any questions along the way or share personal experiences that can enrich the discussion, because it's hard to anticipate all the possible forms that a challenging review and revision both decision, strategy, and practical product might take. So, initially upon learning that your manuscript was not accepted with minor rewording, or your grant is not clearly below the pay line, you and your collaborators, because more and more grants and papers these days involve the participation of interdisciplinary research teams, are going to be disappointed because you put a lot of significant effort into it. And probably at least one member of their team really put their heart and soul into this manuscript or grant, and you didn't get the best result. But you want to ideally try to titrate and remain in the realm of constructive disappointment and not drift into the counterproductive emotion of resentment. And one of the, I think, most important tools is basically to sleep on it. It's best to put the grant and paper aside for a few days before looking at it and approaching the revision, to let these feelings subside, just like when you're locked up in solving a crossword puzzle and the frustration is rising. If you put it away and come back to it a few days later, you're likely to be much more clear-headed and much more efficient and constructive at gaining your goal. So it's really a goal of trying to be constructive in your attitude and willing to accept criticism in a positive light. So, the truth is that almost all papers and grant proposals need some genuine revision before they're accepted for publication. So at the outset, our career should understand that publishing efficiently becomes a long haul endeavor that requires sustained energy and organization. And some scientists or clinical investigators are really good at launching a million different projects, but when they start to either have to do that final little dirty work, or in particular, I've seen with revisions, because it's frustrating that people read your product and had a vision of some shortcomings, that you put this away and keep yourself busy with new and additional projects and become reluctant in completing them. I've seen grants not get revised in the next cycle, even though there's a clear pathway to doing that. And I've seen manuscripts that had the opportunity for major revision falling behind in the to-do pile to new manuscripts, new projects. But really, that's the one that's most closely aligned with a publication, because the reviewers have provided you a roadmap. So, both for prioritizing your overall workload and for these things, I think you want to remember Glengarry Glen Ross, and it's
A, B, C. A, always B, B, C, closing. Always be closing. Always be closing.
right. So you got to always be closing, and your manuscript is exactly that. And to aid you in this process, I think it's good philosophically to think of the reviewer as a consultant rather than an adversary. And I think that's a little bit hard for some people to reach. But really, when you think about it, the reviewer is an academic peer, and they're serving in a volunteer capacity for reviewing NIH grants, for reviewing manuscripts. These are almost without an exception a uncompensated task that people do above and beyond their own busy lives. And we all know how busy we are as academics in training and academics on the faculty. I think that they received 9 different grants at an NIH study section. They are reviewing a number of different manuscripts in their field, and almost everybody goes into these tasks as a good faith effort to use your expertise to rank this submission compared to the others that you're seeing, or the papers that are coming out in the contemporary literature, identify ways in which it can be strengthened and share it with the author. And this is what companies pay big money for consultants to do, and you have free consultants to make your paper the best it can be. And in the special case of grants, no matter how difficult it can be to shrug off this unfavorable study statement, I think Ogden and Goldberg said it best a couple decades ago: shrug you must, because you have to proceed to a well-written, positive, improved revision. And Ogden's axiom is the reviewer is always right, because there's really nothing to gain and everything to lose by strongly contesting a particular comment. And the goal of submitting a proposal is to get funds to support your research. And unless it's a contract, you're basically, not obligated by law or our strict process to follow everything that you do in your grant. You're going to follow the best data to do the best science with your judgment as a PI. So you can't do any of that until you get the grant funding. A paper is a little bit different because sometimes the goal is, of course, to convey into the published literature the most accurate and balanced assessment of the research. And there may be an issue where the reviewer is wrong. On a grant, it hardly pays to fight them on these issues. Grants are a number of common reasons that they are cited for poor score. And I think, the less experienced the grant writer at the early stages in your career, these are the things that come up. So often the impact of the research was not made clearly. And this sometimes comes in comments that evaluate your research as being too descriptive. In other words, there's not an action plan to translate this research into concrete outcomes or discover underlying mechanisms. Or it could be described as being incremental, meaning it's not bold enough that they would hope with this amount of investment and this amount of time with a talented investigator, they are going to move the project forward. Another common critique that you receive is that the aims are dependent on one another. So you're proposing 5 years of research, and if the first aim doesn't go exactly as you proposed, the second and third aims either cannot be completed or are no longer logical. So you don't want a grant in which every aim depends on the success of the prior aim. Poor communication of the hypothesis or rationale. So they see that you're working in a particular area, but they don't know what's driving this proposal forward. If you don't have the expertise in your proven training or publication to execute a line of investigation, you're going to have to recruit that expertise in terms of co-investigators, mentors, or consultants to the project. The reviewers may not be as familiar with the subject as you are, and even though you believe that making a mutant bacteria or isolating these primary cells is a piece of cake because you're a whiz at it. If you don't show them that evidence of feasibility, and in their own experience or in their own impression of the field, this could be challenging, you will get asked to demonstrate that feasibility. Very important to have a discussion of the pitfalls and the alternative approaches as part of the rigor of proposals. And then, of course, anything that is sloppily written or difficult to read, or the text through its typography does not have an ability to help provide a framework for scanning and navigation and understanding where you stand in the proposal, those tend to perform poorly. So you definitely don't want to write a grant in the last minute before the deadline. So there was a great article that is widely circulated, and we use it in our graduate teaching at UCSD, that came from Bill Noble, at a computer scientist and engineer at UW, and in PLOS computational biology, that he called 10 simple rules for writing a response to reviewers. So I've kind of broken out those rules and enriched them with some additional information and graphics for discussion points. But I think that none of the 10 rules was not worthy of inclusion. So I think it's a good article, and I put the link there, and we'll share the slides with the MPRINT Hub for people to read for additional reference. So his first rule is, not just to do your point-by-point critique, but to provide an overview and quote the full set of reviews. So I gave an example here of a paper that took a lot of time for us in the lab and got 3 different complex reviews, and took us about 9 months or more of extra experiments to complete our first revision. But the way that we presented it is to say, first, remind the reviewers what they liked about the paper. Among them, maybe not all 3 of them, but across the 3 reviews, we saw some positive comments on novelty, scientific rigor, and translational significance of our management, which allowed the editors to offer us the chance to revise the paper. We said that each reviewer provided concrete comments for important control experiments to extend and solidify our results, and that we address this in a comprehensive manner with extensive new experimentation as described below, and that this included, 12 new or revised figure panels, plus more in the supplement, which I'm not including here. But you can see here that we outline specifically up front exactly all the things that were done in the revision, because we thought that it's important to tell them that you did a lot of work and to show them the comprehensive effort that was made before you go into the point-by-point review, because otherwise it's hard for them to see just as you come, because the reviews, you're going to answer them in the chronological order of the reviews, reviewer 1, point A, B, C, reviewer 2, point A, B, C. And that won't necessarily be the way that they're laid out in the paper, because the first critique might reference figure 5, and then reviewer 2 finds something with figure 2. So we did this. And then again, trying to make a case for yourself, we said, we believe all the results confirm and extend our discoveries. Each and every comment is addressed in a point-by-point manner in the document, and we greatly appreciate this constructive feedback to strengthen the manuscript. And something like this appears at the front of all my reviews. Of course, when you're revising a grant, you get one page and one page only, and often that page is not enough for you to comprehensively list all the different modifications you may have made in a heavily revised grant. So you may have to pick and choose the most important and score driving critiques in that case, but it's good to emphasize the positives that all the reviewers made in a single statement, rather than saying, I want to thank reviewer 1, reviewer 2, not so much. And then try to make an organic synthesis of everything like that. And then rule number 2 is to be polite and respectful of all the reviewers. I think that the quote from Bill was, even if you are convinced that the reviewer lacks intellectual capacity, it is certainly not in your interest to convey this impression to the reviewer. If you see a comment from a reviewer that is not correct scientifically, or they missed the point that you believe was made in the paper, you have to accept that the fault may lie, at least in part, with your not having made the point clearly enough. And that the reviewers are, in fact, probably way more representative of the readership of the journal, or the breadth of an NIH study section. And that's actually who you're writing for, not your own lab, not your colleagues in the infectious disease journal club, but the broad audience. And if a point was unclear to a reviewer, there's no doubt that some readers would also find it unclear, and you want a manuscript that wouldn't be unclear to the final review. The next is to accept the blame. You always have to accept responsibility, and this is correlated to what we said above. When comments are wrong, still take ownership and apologize for perhaps being unclear, and make some constructive changes to your manuscript to clarify them. And you can thank the reviewer for essentially pointing out that the presentation was unclear. And in general, even if the requested change seems superfluous, or it's not really going to change the manuscript, or it's not your style of writing when they suggest that things be reworded or reordered, it's usually better to proceed with the revision because you are conveying in that manner that the reviewer, that they were listened to and understood. And The goal, of course, of the revision is to have your paper accepted in principle and not to undergo multiple rounds of revision. The next important thing is to make the response self-contained, like you see here with this one-man band. You don't want the reviewers to have to flip back and forth between the response and the paper to understand what you've done. So any changes that you made to the text or the figures should be quoted clearly and directly in the response. And you want to specify the, that's spelled wrong, the page and the line numbers, and make sure to check the final version for alignment, because you'll make one last edit to the manuscript or include a reference and things will get knocked over a page or to different lines. So you have to do that final checklist of just like when you're sewing up in a surgery to make sure that there's no sponges left inside your patient. You want to really double check that the final line numbers in the version are that way. And I think a point is here, by making the response self-contained, you're not inviting the reviewer to keep reading the manuscript over and over again and finding brand new things to critique. So you want to respond to every point raised by the reviewer. So even trivial typos should be acknowledged. This is not only helping ensure that you don't miss something, but also it's telling the reviewers and the editor that you were very careful and diligent. So, don't blow off a particular critique because you think it's not that important. You want to focus on the most important critiques, but leave out no critiques. And then another rule is to be smart in using typography to help the reviewer navigate your response. So you want to number every comment, even if the reviewer didn't number their comments. And if you can use different fonts or formatting or color for the comments in your replies, the response letter will be easier to read. So for example, I often, have the reviewer comments in one color, like black, and then my responses in another color, like dark blue. And I specifically say, this is a response. In this case, you can see that I also am doing some cross correlation, pointing out that this was something similar to a point that was brought up by reviewer 2. And then here is my rationale. And then I'm pointing out exactly what I did in the text. And here you see that I use still a different typography when I'm talking about materials that are revised in the text using italics. And often it depends on the journal, but often it's good to have a one version of the paper in which I typically use yellow highlighting to show all the materials that are new or significantly revised, and then a clean version of the paper, which is free of all that highlighting. And the clean version is usually submitted and assembled into the new manuscript, but the revised version is there as a tool for the reviewers to easily find stuff. But in a self-contained response, they might be able to glean 90% of the information just from your pointing out that you made the revised wording and the revised and the rationale for your revised wording in a self-contained manuscript. This is a little bit different in the NIH. The NIH is no longer requiring designation of where things have been changed in the formatted manuscript. I think these can be indicated in one way or another, either in the cover letter if you feel that you can tell it narratively, or by something such as bars on the side, because often you have a lot of typography in the grant itself already, such as bolding, underlying, and italics to make the emphasis of what you've done. So it might be hard to change that. People don't often recognize, but you can use different colors in the text of an NIH grant. You can use, as long as they're dark and easily legible. So like brick red and deep navy blue are good colors to use in the typography of your original and revised NIH grants, as a further way of emphasizing major headings or key points, or making figure legends look different than the main text. Rule 7 was, whenever possible, begin your response to each comment with a direct answer to the point being raised. So here, the art is that reviewers often complain that there was they made a number of points in their critique, but the authors have kind of cherry picked or made their own interpretation and given a partial or a non-faithful answer to the question. And the point is that even if you're going to disagree, or even if the reviewer is going to kind of disagree with your response, you should never try to avoid a tricky point by simply ignoring it. And sometimes the review has multiple points in a given critique that they've only bulleted out once, but you can break it up in your own response and explicitly address those different points. So it's all about, agreeing to disagree, trying to enter into this exercise not like it's a debate, but it's a discussion. You don't want to be disagreeable. I mean, I have my Australian and British colleagues that I often collaborate with, and they entitle their response letter the rebuttal letter. I'm like, why are you calling it a rebuttal? At the outset, you're basically setting this up like it's a debate or a potentially antagonistic interaction. I always say it's a response because I want to convey that I'm being responsive. I guess it's just that simple. Rule 8, when it's possible, do what the reviewer asks. They're consultants. They're trying to help your manuscript achieve the highest level it can achieve. They're hoping that there might be a pathway for you to get your grant below the pay line on revision. But we understand that sometimes reviewers are just asking for too much. And it's acceptable to say that the requests go beyond what you perceive to be the scope of the current work. You should have autonomy of your laboratory. And often you've made a mistake in the original article by not specifically in the introduction to the paper, given that you know exactly the data that you're going to present, its start, its end, what questions you answered, and what questions you haven't delved into. A proper paper has an introduction that says the explicit goal of this paper was to perform these experiments, collect and share the data, and not more than that. And then if that type of paper goes out for review and the reviewers read it, they often are saying, yeah, they did exactly what they said. But often people, in trying to hype their paper, they take stuff that is fine for the cover letter and they put it into the paper themselves, the paper itself. They have a over grandiose title about the significance of their work, or how definitive their conclusions are. Or in the introduction, they just start talking about the topic broadly. They talk about, how big a burden diabetes is on the healthcare system, and how there needs to be, amazing discoveries, and how the frontiers are being pushed by different technologies. And then they, in their research, address a very small question. And the referees are felt a little dissatisfied after that amazing introduction that got me thinking about everything that needs to be known about diabetes. And they answered only a small part of it. Those are the papers that are more likely going to be asked to do a lot more work. So while you can define a few points as being beyond the scope of the work, to say, like, my laboratory doesn't do in vivo mouse work that you're requesting, or this is the work of a graduate student that is defending now, and it's not a 2-year project, or that's the subject. I think often there'll be a lot of sympathy for that. But if the reviewer suggests 10 points and you're going to try to talk your way out of 9 of them, you're not going to be successful. You do have to try to satisfy the majority, and pick the one or two that there's a good reason for expense or redundancy, or that it's just not the type of researcher that you are, that you don't want to go that way. And often you need to go back to the editor and get the help there, because often the editor is trying to shorten manuscripts, whereas the reviewers are trying to expand manuscripts. And sometimes you can check with the editor beforehand, or say that you're willing to do this major revision only if the editor concurs. Sometimes you'll get divergent comments. Somebody said it's novel. The other people say it's ho-hum, or someone tells you to address a particular issue with one technique, the other a different technique. Most journals, and unfortunately most editors, are not that aggressive at kind of collating and picking the 1 or 2 things that are the most important, and they'll just send all the reviews and responses that came from all the reviewers. So if 2 reviewers are contradicting one another, it's okay to point that out explicitly in a polite tone. For example, you could say, reviewer 2 asked for just the opposite, so we're trying to strike a balance or find the middle ground by whatever approach you've decided. But often that's not that hard, because reviewers don't tend to fight with one another, and they understand, since they are scientists and authors themselves, that it's reasonable for you to try to balance the divergent critiques. You also have to be clear about what changes have occurred relative to the prior version. So sometimes a common error is for the author to say, this point was addressed in the manuscript as follows, but it's unclear as to whether it was already in the original version of the manuscript, or that the text has been changed and this is part of the revision. So you really have to be very precise about what you've changed, and you definitely don't want to just say, oh, you missed it. It was there, without backing that up. And usually what I do, if it was there in the first place, I just make a inconsequential rewording to that section of the paper and then say it's revised to be more clear, as follows. Because why not take credit for a revision, since that's extra work that you've done to improve the manuscript on behalf of the reviewers, even if it was basically there in the primary manuscript. And then his last point, which I think was which was interesting, and I think it may not be a bad idea for complex reviews, is to, it's okay in version 1 to just write down like all the thoughts you have, different potential ways of responding. You can even put down your frustrations, topics that you may decide that you want to fight, topics that you decide are too far. You can do a response to the reviewer that is this living document that is never going to be the one that is submitted, but just throws out all your strategy, all your areas that you might be frustrated with and are looking for a solution. And that's the one that you can share with all the authors in developing a strategy, understanding that ultimately there's going to be a parallel working version that is the friendly, congenial one for submission, as we've discussed. Very important to check for updated medical literature before the resubmission, because usually a number of months have elapsed and some new stuff may have come out that deserve to be incorporated in the manuscript. So that might, change your interpretation of future directions or claims of novelty. In general, people publishing similar research, I found, can be used to your advantage because it's like an independent corroboration on an independent data set. And I think that journals rarely, feel that one paper says it all and are happy to publish your paper. So you should not try to hide or acknowledge or fail to acknowledge other work that is relevant. And if requested, shorten the manuscript. I remember this joke, dear Mr. Dostoevsky, your manuscript, Crime, Punishment, and Redemption, Decision, Major Revision. Thanks for your submission, which has some merit, but the reviewers felt it was too wordy and should be reduced by approximately 1/3. That worked out for Fyodor Dostoevsky, and sometimes, you'll have to alter your vision of what the paper would be and potentially dramatically shorten it, and then you have the grist for your next manuscript or material for your next grant. Once it's published, you have the opportunity in your own seminar presentations, in your own future review articles, in your own press release, to add those extra points of emphasis that may have been cut for size limitations. And I don't want to really go through this, but I added to the presentation a template that was provided by Editage Insights here, with just some wording about how to respond to positive comments. Thank you for pointing this out. We agree and have done the following modifications. Sometimes it's a more general suggestion we've incorporated throughout the manuscript, but also how to respond to comments you disagree with. Thank you for this suggestion. it would have been interesting to explore this aspect, but in the case of our study, it seems slightly out of scope because, and then you're going to have to provide a clear explanation and justification with supporting evidence for the reason that you feel that this paper isn't the place for the topic. And then, remember all these little additional clarifications and wrap it up. Again, appreciate the reviewers and the editors for their work. It's also, I think, important in the overall scope to prioritize the reviewer comments. And that's how you begin working on things like, what is the main question? Are there extremely important comments that if you don't address them in a very forthright and comprehensive manner will cause the reviewer to reject a manuscript? And anything less than that is going to be disingenuous. So you have to understand what aspects of your paper are real emergency surgeries that require the top priority or more elective procedures. And then sometimes you're going to have to make the decision that the comments can't be adequately addressed without radically altering the manuscript to something that you don't want to do, or that would be just too much work and too much effort for your lab and your time frame. And would it be smarter to submit this manuscript to another journal? Or in the case of grants, you may have an idea that the one-page response to reviewers, unless you can really hit a home run, it may be advantageous rather than to revise that grant, to rework it significantly and submit it as a new grant, because you always have an additional chance to revise a new grant, but you only have that one chance to get your revised grant over the pay line. And for a grant that got, maybe scored, but a very high score, and the reviews are all over the place and somewhat conflicting, or suggest that you do a major new focus, it might be hard to get the grant all the way home in that one revision. And it's possible that you may be better served by submitting it as a new grant. And the editor or the program officer, don't be afraid to ask, because they're the person who can help you with these things. So that was my presentation. I promised to target 10:50, and I'll share the slides with the MPRINT hub that anybody who's interested can look at, and it'll guide you to those additional articles and online resources. But I'd be happy to answer any questions if people have some. I'm looking at the Q&A and I don't see any right now, but I think the moderators can see people's hands if there's an issue.
Thank you, Victor. Does anybody have a question? People can type it in the Q&A or raise their hands. I'd be happy to unmute them.
Or just give an example that you're dealing with right now that has you pulling your hair out.
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
I've gotten my last review, the paper got accepted, but I felt it's always reviewer two. I kind of joke around with reviewer two, was actually a little hostile, almost to the point where it was insulting. And it wasn't, I had two other people read it just to make sure I took my own emotions out of it. How do you handle the kind of sometimes hostile comments that you get in reviews? The paper was ultimately accepted with major revisions, but I felt it was unnecessary to be that hostile.
Yeah, the bottom line is, I mean, just don't be that person yourself. That's all I can say. There's in every aspect of every professional sphere, there are, bad apples. There's bad mentors. There's bad doctors. There's dirty sports players who just make the whole experience worse than it needs to be. Ultimately, I think a good thing is to share your experience with the editor of the journal, because often they take that feedback and make some notes about a particular reviewer may not be acting in good faith. What I try to do as a reviewer is be the type of person, like if let's say one of your colleagues asked you to meet one of their graduate students who has a research project and give them some feedback on their research project. And how would you provide constructive feedback to that individual? You wouldn't say, oh, I mean, this is a terrible manuscript, or this is hardly the state of the art, or bash them for their thinking or their writing. You would just, you would be supportive. And the thing is, people often think about PIs who are writing the manuscript, but it's, and they've had 400 papers, they can understand, this tough critique that I'm going to give. But most papers are primarily written by a graduate student or postdoc who might be very early in their research experience. And just imagine, submitting a paper, and because somebody has a rivalry or disagreement with your PI, they bash your paper and say that it's poorly written or weak as a graduate student. That's very, very disheartening. So I always, like if, for example, if somebody missed some of the earlier literature, right? Instead of just saying this manuscript is not novel, and this, was shown, by these investigators before, I'll just say, in 2013, this lab in Pittsburgh published a manuscript that showed this. How do the authors feel that those findings impact, the conclusions that they're making here, right? I've identified that they have some novelty, or they overlook part of the literature, but I'm just saying, hey, there's this other paper. What do you think about that? It's the same effectiveness of critique, because they have to respond to your critique in that context, but it's not contentious, and so it's a little bit different. I point out all the ways that the paper could be improved, and that's what I'm talking about, like a consultant. Here's how you could improve your paper in the comments to the authors. In the comments to the editor, I might say, as I pointed out, these are limitations. These are the strengths of the study. These are the limitations of the study. This is the novelty in my assessment. I actually leave it up to, I try as a reviewer not to accept or reject papers, or tell editors that they should accept or reject papers. That's their job. I'll say, here's the strengths I see of the paper. Here are the limitations I see of the paper. And in my comments to the author, it's always, here's some ideas on how to improve your paper.
And a follow-up question, when giving reviews, do you allow your students to take the first stab at reviewing a paper? I feel like I wasn't given that opportunity in graduate school for my PhD or in medicine, and I feel that it's a wonderful skill to have.
I do that. Yeah, I say like if I know it's very closely related to their topic of their own research with a postdoc or student, I'll say, would you like to review this with me? I even confidentially have done some almost manuscript and review journal clubs with the lab. Like I strip all the identifying information of the paper and I say, you know, it's only for people who want to, but I'd want you to read this paper and think about its strengths and the weaknesses. And then, you know, next Thursday at noon, all the people who read it, we're going to, you know, walk through the paper together and discuss its strengths or weaknesses. And essentially a composite review comes out of that, and it's a learning exercise. So I think those are two different options for doing that. And I think it's great. My reviews are always better when I get insight from lab members.
Does anybody else have any questions? I don't see any hands up.
All right, well, I'm easy to find. And, you know, I think as MPRINT network, we are, you know, one big family here. And I think that this is another resource, the senior experienced faculty in the MPRINT network, especially if they're working in the domain of science that you are, that you should reach out to, you know, even across institutions to get feedback on strategies for revising manuscripts or specific aims on grants and things like this. So.
Thank you so much, Victor. We
All right.
appreciate you
Thanks all for
speaking.
being,
Thank
for
you.
being there. Bye-bye.